Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTB World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at the aftermath of the Supreme Court judgment yesterday regarding the PTI's petition against the ECP's announcement of a delay in the Punjab polls, which yesterday had been declared unconstitutional, and May 14th was the new date that was given by the Supreme Court judgment for the ECP to conduct the polls in Punjab, according to which a notification by the ECP has been issued today, in which May 14th, as per the Supreme Court's judgment, is notified as the new date for Punjab polls, and a new schedule has also been notified. This is important in terms of the reaction, of course, that is emerging out of this particular decision, both within the judiciary and in the political domain. We saw in the aftermath of the Supreme Court verdict that the Federal Cabinet and the National Assembly together rejected the order by the Supreme Court, and there was also the Law Minister and his team that was tasked with the job to finding ways to repulse this particular order and to move forward with how exactly the government is going to proceed, because the implementation of this order is something that they reject and will ensure does not happen. However, of course, we have seen that the notification by the ECP has been notified. It remains to be seen what sort of action will the government be taking with regards to the Supreme Court verdict and how exactly will this be denied. We also know that the Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, has chaired the meeting of the coalition party leaders, in which, of course, this particular judgment was also discussed, and the way forward with regards to the course of action by the current political setup is also something that was part of the agenda. It's important, of course, to note exactly how this particular issue is going to be challenged and the repercussions that it has for the relations between state institutions, the judiciary and the parliament in particular, and how exactly will that play out, particularly for the Chief Justice of Pakistan, who has been outrightly appointed by the Prime Minister and also the PMLN Vice President, among other leaders, talking about the fact that the CJP has proven himself to be impartial in the way that this particular hearing has been heard, in terms of being an Imran facilitator, and of course with regards to the intervention that the political setup claims has been made by the judiciary within the political affairs. Also, of course, referring to the comments earlier passed by the CJP regarding people who have been jailed or who have been charged with corruption being part of the parliament and being able to say and speak at the floor of the House as representatives of the people, something that has been vehemently responded by Maryam Nawaz today as well, which has echoed the statements earlier coming in from the Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, talking about how this particular issue was not raised when it was the former Prime Minister Imran Khan's regime, and similar actions were taken with regards to crack down on the current political setup in the then opposition. And the way that the Chief Justice of Pakistan has acted, according to Maryam Nawaz, points towards a clear violation of the jurisdiction of the judiciary, and that it is his house which is not in order, and that he should take a look at that before commenting on the state of the parliament. This raises, of course, important questions as to how exactly now this will play out in terms of protecting the system of the country, both the judiciary and the parliament, and how exactly will this rift be able to dissolve in light of the upcoming elections as per the notification by the ECP, and then, of course, the increasing polarization within the country. At the same time, we saw that the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, in a video address, lauded the Supreme Court verdict and talked about how he stands vindicated. He's also called for his supporters to come out after Isha prayers today to celebrate the victory and the Supreme Court order. And the claims from the PTI leadership say that the Chief Justice is the Chief Justice of the people, completely different stance from that of the current political setup. So we'll take a look at all of these issues and what this means for the political dynamics of the country. In our next segment, we'll also be taking a look at the remarks that have come from the British Home Secretary, who has claimed that the British Pakistani men hold cultural values at odds with British values. The Foreign Office today has taken exception to this particular statement and has claimed that these are xenophobic remarks and discriminatory remarks that have come from the British Home Secretary, and that this is something completely at odds with the kind of reports that point out that most child abuse cases have been conducted by white men under the age of 30 and not anything voting which is inclined towards traditionally Asian or other communities. And this is important in terms of what the remarks have been termed as in terms of starting race wars and being blatantly erring on the side of what exactly are the facts. And then obviously, of course, stereotyping in general the British Pakistani men and the community within Britain in terms of what the few individuals may have carried out and translating that into what the general community holds as a value system. So these are important remarks that we're going to be taking a look at the end of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. We've also been joined online by our respected guest, Dr. Niaz Murtaza, who's a political analyst, and Mr. Muneeb Qadir, who's a lawyer and a political commentator. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the discussion. Let me start with you, Dr. Niaz, because I want to understand, of course, the political temperature right now as it exists. In terms of the polarization, of course, we've already seen that existing, and perhaps it's natural in terms of the way that political parties act. But the way that different institutions right now seem at war with each other, and there is a lot of contradiction with regards to how the Supreme Court has acted, particularly the Chief Justice, and there seems to be direct comments being made from both sides towards each other and the integrity of the politicians and the Chief Justice and judges of the Supreme Court. It seems that this is an important point that may as well harm the system, both within the judiciary and the parliament, and then of course in between these two as well. What do you take in terms of how these comments are going to play out, and whether or not this is something unusual that has happened?
Well, clearly, if you take a very narrow look at the verdict, it would seem that, the Supreme Court has upheld the Constitution by insisting that, elections should be held within 90 days because that's what the Constitution says. But if you take a broader look at, a series of verdicts that have come since last year, starting with, the 63A, quite odd interpretation where the Supreme Court said that even the votes should not get counted, followed by the Election Commission a decision to de-seat 25 PTI dissidents, even though they had not received any guidelines from the party parliamentary leader. And then, when the matter went to the Supreme Court, the verdict that came out where, it did not hear the appeals of the 25 PTI dissidents and refused to, take a second look at, the 63A verdict. All that, and then, the processes with which these verdicts have been given, the exclusionary approach of, just handpicking certain judges, the undue host in giving, the verdict. So all that, if you add up, you can't really say that, this is a very good verdict that will uphold the Constitution, that will ensure the independence and depoliticization of the judiciary. But that said, the issue is that, there aren't too many legal options available to the government to avoid this verdict. The best it has right now is, to go back with, a review appeal. But review appeals, a review petition, but review petitions have, a very poor track record of succeeding. And it's very likely that, the same bench would, repeat its own verdict again. Beyond that, there is a chance that the new bill that has been approved by the parliament about, clipping the wings of the Supreme Court Chief Justice, if that becomes law, then there is an avenue, an option for the government. But there are several hurdles in the way of that. First of all, how long the president will take to sign on it, and then the fact that the Supreme Court itself could review the law and put it in abeyance or completely strike it down. Short of that, yes, if the government is not left with any options and the decision is so one-sided, then the chances of clash of institutions will increase. And the unfortunate thing is that it's a clash between the two premier institutions, Parliament and the Supreme Court. If it was between, say, the executive and Election Commission of Pakistan or NAB, at least we could turn to the Supreme Court to pass a judgment. But with the Supreme Court itself involved, it looks very, very likely that there will be a huge clash that would make things very, very unstable politically. So there is still time for the Supreme Court to visits at a verdict, for other judges within, the Supreme Court to, give their opinions, and that might add some pressure on the Chief Justice to, review the decision. But otherwise, short of that, this is going to lead to a lot of political instability.
All right. Let me also take Muneeb Saab's opinion regarding, of course, the legal options available to the current political setup. The National Assembly and the Federal Cabinet, and of course, the Prime Minister himself have shared their views regarding the Supreme Court's judgment and have also called for, of course, the rejection of this order. And the Law Minister has been tasked with the duty of finding any legal options. And it seems that the only ones available are what Dr. Niaz has pointed out. But in terms of how exactly will that play out, do you think that there is anything that the government can possibly do in order to prevent this judgment to be implemented? We know, of course, the ECP has already notified May 14th as the new date of Punjab polls, and the fact that with regards to the bench formation and review appeal or the bill passing into law seems like options which are not really feasible.
So the thing is that the bill, Supreme Court Practice and Procedure Bill, the new one, which has been passed by both the National Assembly and Senate, they do provide for reviewing previous suo motu decisions, and a major roadblock with regards to that particular bill and the legal cover that it could provide to the government is the fact that it needs presidential assent. And there is a lot of rift between the Prime Minister and the President already, so that doesn't seem to be happening very soon, that the bill will actually become law, and on that basis the government could then rely on the various sections of the bill to challenge yesterday's decision by the Supreme Court. But I mean, this is Pakistani politics. Who knows what might happen at what time? But at the same time, the fact that Justice Qazi Faiz Isa also, in another recent judgment of his, had pointed out that until and unless there weren't changes made to the Supreme Court rules within the judiciary, suo motu cases will not be taken up. And despite that, the Chief Justice went ahead and decided that suo motu action and suo motu powers, those could be exercised by the Chief Justice alone. So there is a rift between the judges. And the fact of the matter is that although the Constitution does provide for 90 days,
yes. I want to understand what value does Qazi Faiz Isa's judgment hold now in the aftermath of the six-member bench also hearing the case and the Supreme Court's verdict yesterday.
As far as the value is concerned, it undermines what the Chief Justice is trying to suggest, that every judge is agreed upon the way that these recent cases have been taken up. But
hasn't the six-member bench already undermined Justice Qazi Faiz Isa's judgment?
They may have, but morally speaking, from a strictly legal point of view, I mean, depends on which version we take. The last version, which we have in front of us by the Chief Justice, suggests that that is the final word. But morally, it may have tainted the Chief Justice's authority, and I'm speaking of moral authority. That when the next senior most judge is saying that you don't have those powers, that you could exercise suo motu unilaterally, that does undermine the moral authority of what the Chief Justice is trying to project. So in that sense, the debate is still on. And although the Constitution might say that within 90 days you need to hold election, it's not the substantive decision itself which is controversial. What is more controversial is the way that that decision was reached. In the sense that not only Justice Qazi Faiz Isa then, there is also that whole dispute about, was it a 2-3 decision or was it a 4-3 decision? That is also disputed. And then, dissenting notes from other judges as well. For instance, Justice Mando Khail, Justice Mansoor Shah, then Justice Aminuddin Khan, he also recused himself from the bench. And, that also resulted in Justice Yahya Afridi. So many dissenting voices coming from within the apex court itself. What kind of moral authority would, yesterday's judgment carry when you've got the three same judges that everyone knows are quite much on the same page? And they have been, these are the same judges whom you may have seen in the July decision as well with respect to Punjab Assembly. And, you do know the bent of their mind. And with respect to Justice Ijazul Ehsan, he had himself, recused from the judicial bench earlier on because the perception was that he had already made up his mind. And yet, in relation to the KP and Punjab assembly elections, he is part of the three-member bench which gave the final verdict yesterday. So the problem is not so much so with the final verdict itself, but the way that it was reached. And I think that the government is not going to bow down. They are going to put up a fight, which is quite evident from the vice president of PML and Ms. Mariam Nawaz Sharif's statements today.
Right, absolutely, and we'll talk more about that. But Farrukh, when we talk about moral authority, we perhaps may have done away with moral authority in the political domain and by the politicians, but the judiciary or the judges seem to stand on the foundation of moral authority, and if that's put under question, then where do we stand in terms of the moral authority of not just the Chief Justice, but the judiciary itself?
Right, Sana, and while listening to Muneeb Saab and his emphatic points, I thought that I agreed with most of what he was saying, but when he actually mentioned moral authority, he kind of lost me. I mean, when the three-member bench is not pretending to have any moral authority, why are we adamant to actually associate any moral authority with what they are doing? It is essentially realpolitik, it is essentially power politics, it is essentially power grab. And you know how things went yesterday. Yesterday, first of all, they actually came up with this verdict. Then immediately they proceeded for a victory lap. And that was to show the number game, to show the numerical power on the bench. This six-member bench that was constituted, Sana, it was, I mean, the CJ says that he sat one judge with him on a bench just to give a silent message to somebody, right? When you are actually playing on that level, then of course that six-member bench was also a silent message to whosoever is there and whosoever is listening. But my problem is that despite that, unfortunately, they don't see the kind of precipice they are heading towards. In the short run, they have won. Today, in an hour or two, Imran Khan is also going to celebrate, and he will forget, and this is amazing thing that he can forgive and forget everything, even bringing down his government, as long as he gets whatever he wants. Muneeb Saab was saying that these three judges are on the same page. With due respect, they're on the same stone that was hurled by Imran Khan to bring down the masonry of a country's judicial establishment. And Imran Khan Sahab succeeded in the short run. When you talk about the government of Pakistan, I think I don't envy it. I think that the incumbents were handed a very bad hand when they took over. And I don't merely mean the civilian side, I mean also the military side as well. It seems that Bajwa Saab, when he was leaving, he cooked up such a kind of perfect storm that doesn't seem to abate. And that actually, given that the kind of interviews he keeps on giving, it reminded me of a story I had heard 20 years ago, around the time I actually graduated from the university, 25 years perhaps. At that time, somebody told me that Hitler had a journal who was very loyal to his cause, right? That is anti-Semitism. And then, of course, they lost, and that guy was captured. At the Nuremberg trial, when he was to be prosecuted and then executed, at that time, he was asked to give his last wish. And he said that I have killed so many Jews, I want to convert to Judaism, right? So the prosecutors also had sympathy with the man after he converted, but they fulfilled the wish. The moment firing squad actually started shooting and the first volley came, the general says, "Heil Hitler, here comes another Jew." So there seems to be a similar kind of thing that he converted in the last hour just to actually thumb a nose at the current system and the current people that, look, I am going to, even when I go, I am going to undermine you. So this is what is happening. But regarding how things are playing out at this moment, coming back to the moral authority thing and then the issue of the government's response, I think the only option the government has is a long game. That means it has to dig in its heels and it has to prepare for atmospheric changes as they come with every passing month. Yesterday I gave you an illustration of that. I don't want to do it again. But right now, when you talk about moral authority, look at how mathematics now works in this country. Now we are told that we should celebrate because 120 means 90. Because, one more month has been added. Then somehow 4 plus 3 is equal to 5. Right? This is amazing as well. Then 3 is equal to 17. And again, Punjab is equal to Pakistan. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, not so much. Because the senior judiciary of the country did not actually show that kind of urgency in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's case. They actually showed their urgency in Punjab, whence they come. So it is clear what kind of game is going on. But I can tell you that this is the short game. Those who are going to play the long game know how to play with their food as well. Just brace yourself.
All right. Dr. Niaz, regarding, of course, the notification by the ECP for May 14th, there is, of course, the schedule that has also been notified, and there's not a lot of time for the candidates to go ahead and prepare for their campaigns and for everything that needs to be done with regards to the schedule of the ECP. At the same time, of course, we've been hearing that the stance of the political setup is going to be against the Supreme Court's judgment. How exactly will then the coalition parties prepare for or take part in the elections meanwhile, even if they're considering different options, because it's going to take time?
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, with Ramadan still continuing and then, the break for Eid, there isn't really much time for all the things to happen and for there to be, a proper campaign period. But the thing is that the government still has, many options to make its points in the court, because I think what's going to happen is if the government refuses to release the funds, the Supreme Court is going to call everybody back. They've given very strict dates for every step and for reports to be submitted to them. So if the Election Commission reports that, the government has not released the funds, then I think everybody will be called back to the Supreme Court. And there'll be another opportunity for the government to explain its position on why it's insisting on, a delay. And I think it's not making, the best point that it could have made, the fact that, the 63A interpretation was quite odd. And then, that the fact that the appeals of the 25 PTI dissidents were never held. I think those are much stronger points than, about the economy or shortage of funds or security, because, Pakistan has had elections in much worse conditions in terms of security and so on. And 20 billion rupees is not that large a sum. So, but still there are options, to go back, and I hope, the Supreme Court will also show a more openness to, the perspective of the government, of the other judges, and the best course for it would be to call a full court, and for the full court to look at, the whole spectrum of issues, starting from 63A right down to, all these issues that are being raised right now. I mean, if that doesn't happen, and if there is, outright refusal by the government, that will be extremely unfortunate, because, that could just lead to, a collapse of the system, more precipitous, actions by both sides. And, that would be extremely bad for the country. So I think the responsibility is still on the Supreme Court more than the government.
But Dr. Niaz, there's also, of course, it seems a refusal from the Chief Justice also, or the Supreme Court, regarding the formation of full court bench. What possibly can change in the future for that to happen?
Well, there has to be, moral pressure from all sides, from media, from the government, from the other judges within the Supreme Court. That's the only way, keep hammering at it, point out all the huge disparities, the huge one-sidedness.
Is that working? Has moral pressure worked, especially in recent times, in any of the cases that we have seen, or regarding any person or individual? Doesn't seem so.
No, it has to But that doesn't mean that you just give up. You keep trying because the other option is outright refusal, which goes into the realms of gray area, illegality, and I think every side should try to make efforts to avoid that. And as I said earlier too, the main responsibility, the duty is with the Chief Justice of Pakistan to call a full court and have something which has the representation of the full wisdom of the full court, rather than this one-sided, small bench of three justices, who appear on every contentious case, and they're always in the majority, even if it's a five-member bench. So I think there is a lot of, grievances, rightful grievances that the government has, but the problem is that, doesn't have a lot of, legal avenues available to, make its point. But whatever options it has, it should utilize them, keep going back to the court, make it point in the hope that, something will click in the end.
All right, Mr. Muneeb, the issue with regards to, of course, the kind of rejection that we're seeing seems that there can be other ways to go about it, like Dr. Niaz was pointing out regarding any problems with the funds or any claim that can be made to delay the proceedings, which is then, of course, going to take more time. What exactly is going to be the repercussions for that? I understand that they're going to be called in again as per the Supreme Court's judgment, but in terms of any tangible action being taken, it seems that that perhaps may be less likely, and the delay can be something that is achieved through playing around the issue of the funds like that. And then also, of course, with regards to what Farrukh has earlier pointed out in terms of the constitution, of course, that is supreme, and this is what has been celebrated by some quarters regarding yesterday's verdict. But the issue, of course, still remains that the constitution, the 90-day period that it stated, wasn't respected, and that the polls in KP still remain a question mark.
Yes, absolutely. Yesterday when I got to know of the verdict by the Supreme Court, I wasn't surprised. It was predicted just one day beforehand. Everyone knew it would go in PTI's favor, and it's because the Constitution, like I've said, substantively says that elections are to be held in 90 days. But the thing is that if the government really stands by what they're saying, that they would be boycotting this particular judgment, then, well, there are two possibilities. Either they could go on a collision course with the judiciary, and so there will be a huge deadlock between the executive and the judiciary, which really isn't good constitutionally. And on the other hand, they may resort to delaying tactics. So they may play by the rules and within the rules. And by delaying, I mean that, of course, I did mention the fact that there were irregularities in the way that the Supreme Court came to the decision yesterday. The irregularities being that, either the bench itself, they voiced disagreements. There was question mark over whether a majority had been reached even, or it hadn't been reached in the first March judgment. And then eventually, the ultimate question that why was the Chief Justice so adamant on unilaterally exercising suo motu powers and of keeping these three judges on the bench? Why, for example, not Justice Qazi Faiz Isa, for that matter, or Justice Masood or Justice Yahya Afridi? So why not? Is it that the decision would have gone in some other direction? And so, were dissenting voices from within the judiciary, were they silenced? Were they, crushed? So that makes the decision controversial. So around these issues, and ultimately the fact that there's also Section 58 of the Elections Act, which does give the Election Commission of Pakistan the power to alter, if needs be, to alter the date of the election. And so the fact you just mentioned that the costs, particularly when it comes to KP, or the question of readiness, those might come into the equation, that perhaps it's too costly, perhaps the required amount of security would not be available. How could you keep free and fair election within this environment, which is again a constitutional duty upon the Election Commission itself? So those issues could be brought forward, and they could be brought up, and then who knows that the 14th May date may be pushed ahead.
Farrukh, I want to understand that as well, because in terms of what we have seen and how we look at the way that politics play out, usually there is, of course, one politically correct, morally abiding way of doing things. And there's also, of course, what really is going on in terms of power dynamics and realpolitik, as you earlier mentioned. In terms of the way that things play out, and if there is blatant impartiality, what really is the right course of action then in terms of going forward? Because those who are going to be abiding by what is politically correct will be at the losing end.
Right. That is a brilliant question, Sanam. And that actually brings me back to enjoying this comic strip kind of reality that we are living in right now. I mean, since yesterday, you must have heard people say, especially even those who were very close to General Pervez Musharraf, that Nazariya Zarurat, or doctrine of necessity, has been buried, right? So I was nonplussed. Why would they say something of that sort? Until I heard, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a U.S. lawmaker who is a far right, lawmaker, and who is very in great support of Donald Trump. She ended up calling Donald Trump, Nelson Mandela. So there is a comedy show called The Daily Show in the US. So there came a rebuttal, and that was amazing. That will tell you where we are at right now, right? The one gentleman says there that Donald Trump is Nelson Mandela of people who put Nelson Mandela behind prisons. Right, if you know any history of apartheid in South Africa, you would know who actually put them behind bars, right? So similarly, though this doctrine of necessity that has been buried is buried in support of those who have been celebrating the previous instances of doctrine of necessity. So bear with me. I think that this too will pass. But regarding the moral side, look, I tell you what is happening. When it comes to politics, I'm agnostic. When it comes to ideology, and I keep on saying that I'm not ideological, that actually means that I'm nihilist. That means that I can actually argue the case from both sides. There is one factor that has changed my mind, and I have taken risks that I might not have taken since the Dogar courts, and that is Qazi Faiz Isa. The way he is once again, the entrapment is continuing. The 6-member bench actually was a show of power, but also thumbing the nose at the person who has been persecuted already and telling him what is coming next, right? Similarly, today Gujranwala Bar actually came up with a resolution that there should be a reference filed once again against Qazi Faiz Isa and his brother judge as well. Similarly, there are very competent people who are on this side, and they are going to be persecuted if this kind of streak continues. So that's why I have actually taken a position, and I am going to actually continue with that. So far, not saying that I have never been wrong, or there can't be a first time when I am totally wrong, but I think that so far every battle in which I have taken a side has always won. So I can assure you that in the long run, Qazi Faiz Isa Saab cannot be displaced. Whatever monkey tamasha this side actually brings up, that is not going to have the kind of impact that was assumed, because now, as you have seen, that incredible number of fellow judges have actually stood up and taken a position. And that shows you that there are people who worry about not the optics or not the semantics, but also about the substance of the Constitution and the substance of democratic nature of the country. If you consider them, and if they are on the right side of history, then these people who are actually going for victory lap, I mean, yesterday I told you how they are actually manipulating the outcomes. For example, Justice Ijazul Ahsan has been heading two benches. One hearing the case of federal government employees housing authority. That actually was originally a suo motu that was taken by Islamabad High Court, and they declared that this allotment of plots to federal government employees, including judges, in sector F14 and F15 were illegal, and that should be removed. After that, the Supreme Court actually took up the matter and said that it is not right. So Ijazul Hasan is actually effectively heading that bench, ensuring that all those judges who were actually part of the bench yesterday, 6-member bench, they remain under pressure. Similarly, I told you about another bench that is hearing the case of law officers that PTI actually gathered together and inducted while it was on a losing streak. And those people are lawyers, and because they have been now removed, that case is also being heard by Ijazul Hasan Saab. So this is a clear manipulation. It can continue for a certain period of time, but what will you do after September? No matter what, Chief Justice cannot. Let us see if he is going to extend his own tenure. And let us see if he is going to try to actually manipulate the Supreme Judicial Council. Amazingly, even there is going to be something very fascinating that you will see, because the CJ has been actually trying to pack courts with his lawyer list. And there you have to blame the federal government and the law minister as well, because there was a scene, if you remember, we discussed it ages ago, when there was Judicial Commission meeting and there were objections from 2 ranking members, and then the government actually gave in and appointed certain people who were nominated by CJ, right? Despite the objections that the people who were elevated might not have the kind of caliber that was needed, or they might have baggage. But if they have done it, even then, this too shall pass. Remember that in this country, there is a reason why democracy keeps on returning, despite dictatorships. And that is that there is something about these people that actually stand finally with the right side. Right of media support, by the way. I think that our media is totally bonkers, and it will never side with the right side. But all you have to do is just zone it out and keep on working.
Okay. Dr. Niaz, any comments regarding whether or not there is any silver lining in all of this situation?
Well, I mean, this new law, this new bill, once it becomes law, I think it will lead to more balance within the Supreme Court, with power diffused across 3 or 4 senior most judges rather than being in the hands of one person. And I think it's underscored the need for more serious judicial reforms, because there are other issues also where things get manipulated in terms of elevation of judges to the Supreme Court, in terms of fixing of cases before benches and so on. So I think it's really highlighted the need for a thorough look at the judicial system at the moment, the huge backlogs that they have, and what cases they focus on and which cases they just ignore. So I think there is a need for a new parliament to look at these issues very closely and come up with some new laws which strike a balance between independence of the judiciary and the powers of the Chief Justice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Niaz Murtaza, for joining us and sharing your views. We're now going to be taking a look at the statement coming in from the British Home Secretary regarding, of course, the British Pakistani men and the comments made of their cultural values in relation to a discussion around child sexual abuse. Mr. Muneeb, the discussion, of course, is important, not just in terms of what the Foreign Office has termed as xenophobic or discriminatory, but also in terms of where it's coming from and the impact that it's going to have both within Britain and in the world.
So we have to look at, Suella Braverman's statement within the context of British politics, because her predecessor, Priti Patel, had already started this whole idea of, to an extent, demonizing and vilifying immigrants. And xenophobic rhetoric and policies, and she was the one actually who came up with the idea of transporting, or let me put it that way, deporting these illegal immigrants, so-called, back to Rwanda. and from within the left-wing human rights activists and those quarters within Britain, voices had started coming forward, be those NGOs or be those activists or even members of the performing arts and film industry. They were all mentioning the fact that this would be highly illegal, looked at from an international law perspective, because the Refugee Convention does not allow for a reformer to send back, to deport back an asylum seeker and not to consider the applications. And now Suella Braverman, who was then later on appointed by Rishi Sunak, she decided to take it several steps further. And so within that rhetoric, she talked about introducing the small boats law, as it's known, which is that people arriving illegally, so to speak, within Britain on small boats are just going to be sent back, or maybe sent back to Rwanda. And that bill has caused a lot of uproar, and again, human rights organizations within Britain have been very alarmed about it. So it's in the same vein that when she was sitting on that Sky News show, during her interview, she specifically targeted British Pakistani men. Now, the thing is that people from within the right-wing quarters of Britain, who are anti-immigrant, who might, display behavior or rhetoric which may be, I think, reasonably labeled to be xenophobic. They have said that these British Pakistani men, they do not merge or integrate well within the British, lifestyle, the British way of life and British values. I do understand that there definitely are individuals from different communities, including British Pakistani community, particularly men, who do have very problematic views about, Western women, so to speak. And yes, there were findings even by, Miss Dame Lacey. She had mentioned that, in 2015, there were some of these, grooming gangs, which did include members of the British Pakistani community. That has been the case, but her own Home Office department has contradicted what Suella Braverman has, so confidently claimed, because statistics suggest that it's still your typical British white male who has been involved in the sexual abuse, grooming gangs. And that is the problematic area. That is what needs to be targeted. But what she's done is she has directed all the vitriol and all that anger which is mounting up in a post-Brexit environment as well, and in the context of cost of living crisis, towards immigrants, once again to justify that small boats law first. And one last thing that I want to mention here is that just 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with the former Speaker of the House of Commons, Mr. John Bercow, and I asked him, what does he think about Suella Braverman's policy? And he said that would be challenged in the courts because it is contrary to international law. And mind you, the European Court of Human Rights has already deemed it illegal, this whole deporting asylum seekers back to Rwanda. So I understand that she's trying to, canvass support for her bill and for her Rwanda policy. And so that is why she is trying to raise an alarm that, these people, ethnic minorities within the country, they are a danger. And in that way, she has targeted British Pakistani men. I think it's irresponsible, and it only fans the flames of polarization that we're seeing within the British political landscape.
Absolutely. But Farrukh, in terms of countering such racist stances or the impact that it's going to have on marginalizing certain communities, then what exactly, of course, is the way forward? Because it's obvious in terms of how the facts are or how a generalization is made. But can this only be undone by certain reports claiming otherwise, or by people saying that these remarks are xenophobic or discriminatory?
That's an amazing question, Sana, and that is a very valid one. I want to actually comment on what was said earlier, but first let me answer your question. There are, of course, there are going to be people who have already convinced themselves that all immigrants are bad, right? That includes the grain or the identity of Suella Braverman herself as well, because she is also an immigrant, right? But even then, I think that the British people are one of the most, tolerant people. And we have seen the way South Asians have made home there, and they have been absorbed. Naturally, if you are actually hailing from hard right, you are going to play to the gallery. And that is exactly what happened, and I want to build up some context there as well. But I want to give you one example of one Eleanor Williams, who is 22 years old, white Caucasian woman, who actually claimed that she was actually made victim of grooming gangs, and she was abused, raped, and God knows what not when she was minor. And then BBC and Sky News both actually came up with broke the news that she actually was making up the whole story because she wanted attention, right? That is also happening. So I think that the whole debate about grooming gangs and South Asian identities, especially two countries are actually brought in, Pakistan and then Bangladesh. They are repeatedly mentioned because both are Muslims predominantly. So this is something that keeps on coming. But now the context as well. When you talk about British politics, I love it because on the right side, especially in the Conservative Party, now you have this amazing cast of characters which are fascinating. On one side you have Shashi Sunak, and then there are umpteen other people as well. But then Swala Braverman is actually, she hails from hard right of the party. She actually, despite her Indian origins, she believes that the British Raj was a correct thing that happened, right? I kind of like her as well. I can't explain it, but very interesting kind of interpretations.
Right.
Now recently what is happening with the British politics and American politics is that Indian expatriate community comes under pressure because India's government actually is such which cannot be defended, and every time they do something wrong, there is a reaction from one of the lawmaker or something that happens, and then Indian people start attacking, the community also attacks, and then they have to balance it out by actually dragging in the Pakistani immigrants as well.
Right.
One example was the US, when Rahul Gandhi was actually, disqualified. At that time, one gentleman tweeted, the US lawmaker tweeted of Indian origin in support of him. And then what happened? He came under so much attack that immediately he had to change track and focus on Pakistan. Similarly, British government is also under pressure right now because then, Khalistan movement actually held a referendum there, and they kept on protesting in front of the Indian High Commission. After that, Indian government actually withdrew support or protection around the British High Commission in India. And because this now the community is being hardened during the Modi regime, what has happened is that in the end, they actually keep on demanding some blood from Pakistanis as well. And in the end, as a compromise, this statement, I think this despicable, this horrible, this sad statement was made. Right. But that is part of atmospheric pressures.
All right.
It doesn't qualify as a ground or objective reality.
Of course. Thank you, Farrukh, for those comments. Thank you, Mr. Muneeb, for joining us and being a part of the discussion as well. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.